Hello and welcome to Fullerton College's Printing Technologies Department Prepress Combined Lecture, Print 75 and 77. This is Professor Ben Hewitt, and today we're going to start in on our PIA prepress training. That was a mouthful. Hope I don't have to say that in every video. Spoilers, I think I do. Anyways, let's get started. We're beginning out at Task 5, Module 1, because the PIA couldn't do normal chapter names. Oh well. It's cute. It makes it feel like a training course, right, guys? Okay. Anyways, so this is looking at reproduction models. So this is actually kind of a bit of a refresher for Print 101. This is a bunch of information coming up about really what goes on that we're trying to design for. What are the systems and the processes that our designs, our graphics, our output is going to have to survive? Let's go. Yeah. Listen to me, computer. So they would like us to look at the different, a few key historical figures who made some important breakthroughs to make our industry and our way of making and copying image and text a thing. Looking at different major categories of how prints are made. We're going to look at different characteristics of what these different types of print systems produce, what comes out of them. And we're also going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each printing method. This is actually pretty useful info to have. Again, remember when you're making your designs and when you're working towards a print project, you're not just making a pretty picture, you are actually engineering something that has to survive both its manufacturing process and its intended use in the world. If those how to escape an airplane when it crashes cards that sit in the seat backs on airliners were printed on crappy paper and didn't survive being read more than once or twice, I can see that becoming a significant issue. Anyways, let's go ahead and start on through. So here's our beginning, back toward the beginning of it all. Our segue back to the beginning of printing, at least in the West. Anyways, I'm trying to make it more of a color commentary rather than just pure PowerPoint karaoke, because honestly, you guys can read these things in your books and just read them. You don't need me to read them to you. If you do need me to read them to you, let me know privately, and I will make sure that they are being read to you. But moving on. So printing process is any sort of reproduction method where an original is reproduced in quantity. That means you're taking one and you're making lots of copies. Generally speaking, you need to use some sort of image carrier that's going to take it and transfer that image onto multiple sheets of paper or whatever other thing you are printing on, called the substrate. The end use is different. And every single print product is unique in some way. It all depends on what it's going to be used for. Are you printing labels onto shaving cream cans? Are you printing box packages for models or toys? Are you printing takeout bags for restaurants? Or is it just something a bit more standard like a newspaper or a business card? All of them look, feel, and function completely different based off their intended use. Everything we produce is meant to be used for something. So the image carrier is the part of the printing process that makes that printing process unique. What is it that's carrying that image? How are you taking ink and making it into the shapes you want? That's what the image carrier does. Every image carrier has two areas, as they call it here. They have the image area and non-image area. I don't like thinking about it this way because that just sounds kind of blah. I like to think about the fact that every single point, every single micron of space, every square inch, every dot, really, in the end, it's the halftone dots or the pixels, but every single tiny dot on your screen that makes up the whole grid, that makes up the screen. Sorry, I'm looking at my computer and a screen printing screen here. It doesn't have to be a screen, but on an image carrier, every single little tiny dot on there answers one question and only one question, and always the same question. The question is there ink here? If you're talking about letterpress, wherever the letters are raised up in the little lead blocks of type, the answer is yes. And that's the image area. Wherever there is a lowered area, that part does not touch the paper. Again, talking about letterpress here, you're thinking about your traditional lead type, then yeah, if it doesn't raise up, then there's no ink there. That's a non-image area, and the answer is no. So to me, I mean, I know I simplify it a bit here, but I always think of it as yes ink and no ink as the two main sections of any sort of image carrier. Substrates. Don't hate substrate. Yeah, I went there. Anyways, so Substrate is a very fancier. Uh, wow, I'm just mumbling a bunch. I'm sorry, guys. This is a mumblecore film, isn't it? But the substrate is whatever you're printing on. Most commonly, it's paper or some form of paper like paperboard or cardboard. But we print on other stuff too. Plastics, foils, t-shirts, mugs, metal, gauges. In some cases, they use screen printing to do stenciling for things like tail numbers on airplanes. So anything can be a substrate, really, especially as our printing systems get more robust and we gain the abilities to print on wider varieties of substrates. The world is your substrate. Print it. Also, they might call it the stock. But honestly, most commonly it is paper. By volume of what's being made, paper is the most common thing. Here's our brief history here. 1456 is an important date in history. That's when Johann Gutenberg out in Germany, although it wasn't Germany yet, was it? In the German provinces, they had not unified for another 400 years. But Gutenberg was trying to find a way of helping expand literacy and getting more people access to the written word. In his case, specifically, it was the written Christian Bible because that was the important text of its day in Europe. Of course, where did printing really start? Probably 1,000 years before this, the Chinese were already printing. In fact, to steal an answer from Mark Barber over at the Printing Museum, if anyone ever asks the question, where was such and such invented, talking about pretty much any technology, it's a safe bet to say China, because they invented a ton of stuff. They just didn't share their information a whole lot. And they're kind of isolated from the part of the world that my people come from, at least. It was a big deal to get to China. It was a hard journey, either by land or sea. But anyways, so other than the fact that the Chinese were doing this stuff for a very long time, fast forward to, well, of course it is, the beginning of the Renaissance in Europe, because this is what started the Renaissance. And Gutenberg decided he wanted to make books affordable and wanted people to be able to read religious texts for themselves and not rely on political religious leaders to tell them what their text was saying. So he invented movable type and the printing press. His biggest contribution is actually a metallurgical contribution of figuring out the proper alloy to make lead type. Because if you use pure lead, it's too soft and doesn't survive use. And if you use pure other metals, the melting temperature is too high. So you end up with this combination of lead, tin, and antimony, and you put those three together in the right quantities, and you have a type that melts at a low temperature, which means you don't need much more than like a candle's flame to melt it, really. You don't need a giant, forge. So you can melt and reclaim type and recast it as necessary. But it's strong enough to hold the details and to survive being mashed into paper at 60 pounds per square inch, which, believe me, actually does wear things down. Paper is, in its own way, sandpaper. So it's taking a lot of physical abuse when you're making lead type. So anyways, he invented that and started the whole industry, started the craze that today still continues. What has it been now? 600 years about? Almost 600 years of printing. And you can see that our society around the world has changed from one largely illiterate of people only communicating orally and recording things as images sometimes. Like if you think about the old signs that would hang on businesses, they would just have pictures. People would be the barber at the sign of the golden scissors and sheep. They have like a painting of a sheep and scissors, and that's kind of like your icon and your business logo. But they didn't have words because people couldn't read them. Now our street signs all have names written on them because everyone can read. Universal literacy is a pretty cool thing. So Gutenberg. Also, fun side story here because I have to go there. I still get made fun of my family, and part of the reason I'm known as Gutenben is because a long time ago I was on a big family trip to Disneyland with like lots of family, some of mine and some of Lonnie's. We all kind of met up and hung out there. And we were waiting around for somebody or something, and everyone was playing 20 questions. And I thought I'd be clever, and I was in the game of 20 questions where you have to guess what the person's thinking of. I was using Gutenberg. I had assumed he was common knowledge throughout the world. Like everybody knows Gutenberg. He's important. He started modern Western civilization by starting printing. Turns out he's not as famous as I thought he was. And they still make fun of me for that one. Anyways, moving on. 1798, right in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Kind of funny, huh? how right in the beginning of these different major cultural revivals, there's a new printing technology. Coincidence? Actually, no, legitimately not at all. But anyways, so Eloi Sennefelder, his name is hard to say for me, invented lithography, which was a way of printing from a wet limestone written on with greasy ink so that the water and the oils repelled each other and you were able to make much more interesting images. You could draw on the limestone and make copies of it. One of the big things that lithography became was a way of reproducing art prints and putting pictures in the newspapers, and it caught on, and it was like gangbusters. People love that stuff. In 1897, Ottmar Mergenthaler invented linotype. If any of you have been in 101 and gone to the printing museum, you've probably seen this machine. They love to demonstrate it. The linotype machine looks like a typewriter with a gigantic mechanical contraption behind it. And as you type on the typewriter, mechanically, completely analog through gears and levers and pulleys, it puts a series of molds in order of what you typed, and then it pumps hot lead into them and casts a line of type. Gee, I wonder where the name came from, so that you can print entire sentences and paragraphs at once. In the 1890s, also, rotary printer became standard, which means they started using rollers to pass the paper over instead of just putting a sheet on and mashing it down like you did up until then. Think the Gutenberg presses and what people like Ben Franklin would use. You put your sheet on and then you'd pull a lever and the thing would smash it. But rotary meant that it could pick up the paper, run it across, and put it in a pile on the other side. So instead of having to physically line up the sheets of paper every time, you gave the press a stack of paper and it fed it through as you pulled the levers or cranked them. Rotary really sped things up, and that's when newspapers got really huge. In 1904, you have offset lithography from Ira Rubel, and of course they put themselves here. The LTF, later the GATF, later the PIA was founded in 1924. So of course they put that on there. Now, whenever new things come out, old things don't go away. Old things have their purposes and they stay around. This is one of those things that movies always get wrong. Whenever they have a movie that takes place back in time, it's like it's 1936 in this movie. It's a gangster movie. I happen to like some of those. But anyways, so it's 1936. So we're going to show Chicago as it was in 1936. And every single car on the street is a 1936 model. And yeah, technically they're all period correct. Technically every single car is okay to be there because it was built the year the movie is supposed to be set in. Except where are the old cars? Where are the vehicles left over from 35, 34, the 20s? A ton of cars are produced in the 20s because times were good and cars were new technology. Where are all those? Anyways, old things stay in service, even though new things come out. Also, old things get improved. You find ways of doing things better and doing them more efficiently and finding more uses for them. So printing technology doesn't go away. Letterpress was the first major segment of printing, and it's still here. It's used mostly for art purposes nowadays because people enjoy the look that you get from using lead type more than any practical efficiency reasons. So we've come a long way. In the very beginning of the written word, in the Western world at least, although actually everywhere, the earliest things were written by hand. In the Western world, they used monks, and the church was largely in charge of literacy. So monks would spend their lives learning to read and write, and they would write books by hand. And by write, I do mean mostly copy books. So the reproduction technology was a person with a pen. Nowadays, you have these high quality, high speed multicolor processes using high speed offset printing presses. And nowadays, since they've published this particular slide set, things are being taken over by even more robust systems that do even more interesting things, like spraying ink from tiny nozzles and electrostatically clinging small particles of polymer ink and then heating them to melt onto the paper. There are all sorts of ways of printing that produce all sorts of high quality images on all sorts of varied substrates. I'm going to stop the first video here and I'll try to make it farther in the second one. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again soon.